My son-in-law stood at the head of my daughter's dining table with his glass held high, basking in the clink of crystal like applause, and called me a parasite. He laughed and said I had leeched off real men's paychecks, thumped his chest, and bragged about his promotion. He had no idea that every check he had ever cashed, from the mall shoe store in college to this brand new corner office, had come from me. Before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're tuning in from. People think a good secret tastes like honey, but that is only true when you plan to swallow it. Mine was kept to be used. Not out of malice, at least that is what I told myself, but because there comes a day when a man has to protect his family with the blunt instruments available to him. I had hoped for kindness, or at least a mutual truce. Instead, I got a toast with my name tucked into the punchline. My name is Walter. I am 68 years old, a grandfather twice over, and the owner of a ribbed, puckered scar that runs along my left hip like a grim smile. I earned it crawling out from under a paper machine when I was 22 and the hot liquor line ruptured. The company doctor told my wife Lucy I would always walk with a limp. Lucy cried in the hospital bathroom, and when she came out, I lied and told her it did not hurt. My daughter, Margaret, was 4 at the time. She remembers none of it. She remembers ballet shoes and church picnics. I have never corrected her. For 36 years I ran Henderson Paper, which was really a collection of debts with a mill in the middle. We made paper towels and cardboard and, during the lean years, we made nothing but excuses. I learned to make payroll with a prayer and a phone call. When the banks began to treat me like a child who had tracked mud into the house, I found private money. Private money is often gentle in the handshake and sharp in the smile. When I finally got ahead, after union talks, after praying through the night, after selling the lake cabin and swallowing my pride to call the man I promised Lucy I would never call again, I sold to a conglomerate that wore kindness like a tailored suit. They left me with what looked like the crumbs, a motley group of holdings I had collected to keep the mill alive, our trucking company, the staffing agency that had kept our second shift humming, and a little bank out near the interstate, the kind people drove past without noticing. I rolled those crumbs into a holding company with a name I borrowed from the river that turned our turbine, Tall Water. The lawyer told me I could take the founder's stock and build in layers of protection. In plain language, it meant I could step back into the shadows and still hold the rope. I had reasons to hide. The first was the town. If folks knew how much I held, they would hate me when times were bad and resent me when times were good. The second was closer to home. Margaret married a young man who admired only what could be photographed, cars, watches, his own reflection. His name is Ashton. When he first came to Sunday dinner, he performed generosity like a stage play. He brought wine with labels that made me squint, and he shook my hand too long, as if to pin me in place for an audience's approval. I am in finance, he announced that first night, as if it were a destination instead of a path. Finance where? I asked. He smiled. Nowhere worth mentioning yet. I thought nothing of it then. The mistake I made was believing that time would humble him. It did not. It inflated him. The first job he took was with a logistics firm. He came around the porch in a new shirt as bright as a stop sign and told me he had negotiated a territory. I said that sounded fine. He explained it to me as if to a slow student. I asked him who owned the firm. He did not know. He knew the logo. The logo had a swooping arrow meant to suggest speed. I knew the company, too, but not because of the arrow. I knew it for its balance sheet, and I knew it because of paperwork in my safe, Tallwater had become its silent majority owner the year before, to keep our truckers paid when diesel spiked so hard the foreman, Pete, had started parking rigs at angles to catch luck in the wind. After the logistics firm, Ashton spent a year at a staffing company whose job postings were so breathless they sounded like advertisements for happiness. He bragged about building a pipeline of candidates. The day he started there, Margaret hugged me in my kitchen and said, "He is finding his stride." I smiled and told her the truth, I hoped so. I also knew the staffing company's biggest line of credit ran through a commercial loan desk on the second floor of that little bank by the interstate, the bank Tallwater had taken over during a quiet weekend when the previous owners realized they were one more bad quarter away from a sign on the door that would read simply, "Closed." From staffing to tech, which is what Ashton called it. He paroled himself from those first 2 years of stepping stones and joined an outfit that sold software to warehouses. He called it transformative. I called Pete and asked him if it actually worked. Pete told me it was a usual, half-helpful thing, like making a map out of soggy paper. "The money's good, though," he added. I told him to call me if the money ever stopped. Pete had been with me since we both showed up to the mill with lunches our mothers had packed. All of this might have been a pile of interesting coincidences if Tallwater had not, by slow accretion, become the ground beneath Ashton's feet. I had not intended it that way. I had simply collected what I could hold, transport, staffing, a bank's quiet hum of deposits, and kept them operating with the small-town patience I understood. Somehow, in the way a town streets overlap, his jobs and my holdings intersected so thoroughly that it became true in slow motion. Every paycheck Ashton collected, every bonus that made him throw a jacket on a chair and loosen his tie with theatrical exhaustion, was floated, insured, or directly dispersed through entities I controlled. It felt like a cosmic prank. I did not plan it. I did not want him to know. Then his promotion came, and the prank stopped being funny. It was a Saturday in late May, the air syrupy with cut grass and grill smoke. The family gathered at Margaret's because the promotion had been announced late Friday and Ashton had insisted on a little soiree, which is what he called a party when he believed I might not approve. He stood at the end of the table and held his glass and told us the title they had given him. Vice President of Growth. It sounded like something you might set in soil and hope would sprout money. To everyone who told me I was dreaming too big, he said, "You have my thanks for the fuel." "Here, here," murmured one of Margaret's friends, who wore bracelets that clinked like wind chimes. "To Dad," Margaret said, smiling at me. "Dad taught me to keep trying." Ashton smiled at her, then turned toward me in a way that felt like the closing of a trap. "And to my father-in-law," he said, raising the glass higher, "who has always been supportive. In spirit, if not financially." We all have to make choices. Some of us chose to actually build something. Some of us chose to collect a pension and, what is the polite word? Avoid a day's work. The world is full of good men and parasites. He smiled. I will let you all decide who is who. It is an odd sensation, to feel your ears warm like a boy's. I looked at Margaret. Her mouth had opened as if she had dropped something fragile. She whispered his name. He squeezed her waist as if she were a bottle of ketchup he wanted to empty. "Come on," he said. "It is a joke." I smiled because fights can be taxes on grandchildren. I stood and toasted him in return. "Congratulations," I said. "I hope your new responsibilities are as rewarding as you imagine." I set the glass down carefully, like a detonator. We ate. My grandchildren wore barbecue sauce like victory paint and ran through the yard while the sun did its old trick with the maple leaves. I cleared plates. Ashton strolled the patio as if he were inspecting a minor province. He slapped my shoulder and told me he would get me a belly like that one day if I kept eating like a king. I laughed because the other choice was to say what I knew. That night, Lucy and I went home. She asked me what I was thinking. I told her, carefully, that I was thinking about Pete in his kitchen with his arthritic hands and the way Ashton had treated the hostess at the country club last month, when they had him down for the wrong tea time. He had spoken to her with a voice like a faucet turned to a thin, humiliating trickle. Bullying small people is a kind of tax, too. It has a way of compounding. I do not want to make it worse, Lucy said. No, I agreed. But I do not want to make it better for him either. The trouble with age is noise. Every injury echoes. Every slight rattles louder. I lay in bed listening to the silverware of my memories. I remembered Ashton at Thanksgiving 2 years earlier, pushing the stuffing around his plate with the fork held in his fist like a boy with a toy, telling us all about a colleague who had cried in a bathroom because of a performance review he had delivered with precision formality. Sometimes, he had said, you have to make them hurt to make them improve. Sometimes, Lucy had replied, you can do both. He had not noticed her tone. The promotion meant Ashton would be supervising entire territories and building the bonus pool he had previously fed from. It meant he would be signing purchase orders. It meant a half-dozen of my concerns braided into a rope I could either climb or hang from. I went into my study, opened the safe, and brought out a battered leather folder. Inside were the trusts, the operating agreements, the board resolutions, and the emergency powers I had never invoked because I had never needed to. I read, and I remembered, concessions I had won by playing the donkey longer than any other man at the table. There is a lot of talk about old men clinging to power. My experience has been that old men cling to responsibility because we know what happens when no one does. I had placed good people on the boards of those companies. I called them. I spoke slowly and calmly and used phrases like material exposure and reputation risk, because that is the language that takes a person by the elbow and guides them toward the truth. Do you have something concrete? Asked one of them, a woman named Danielle, who had kept our little bank from experimenting itself to death with derivatives. Not yet, I said. I have a strong feeling and 30 years of instincts that have only failed me when I ignored them. Then we will look, she said. We looked. I did not pry into his emails or pry open his drawers. I did not put a private investigator on him, though I considered it. The world will often hand you what you need if you wait one day past your patience. In Ashton's case, it took 3. He had scheduled a meeting with a software vendor I had never heard of, a boutique firm that specialized in inventory visualization. The phrasing made me think of a magician who can make half your stock appear, and presumably the other half disappear. Ashton had assembled a group in a glass-walled room in a new building whose hallways smelled faintly of laminate and lemon, a room with a view of a water feature that existed only to lie to you about serenity. His assistant, who was new and whose bun made her look disciplined and determined, was in that room with a laptop and a stack of printed decks. She was treated like furniture. The meeting would have passed like a breeze if not for one thing. On the first slide, there was a logo I recognized. Not the software firm's. Tall Waters. That was the trick of it. The software vendor had been bought 2 months earlier by a private equity consortium that included Tallwater. It was a small deal, tucked into the back pages of our internal newsletter where achievements are measured by the commas they contain. I had not seen the slide. But someone else had, the assistant. She frowned and called HR to ask if it was normal for a vice president of finance to have their personal consulting LLC listed as a channel partner on a preferred vendor slide. The HR person said, "What?" The assistant repeated the question. The HR person said, "Please hold," and then, after a very long hold, "Can you please send that slide to me?" The assistant, who had a grandmother who lived down the street from me and had once fed my dog scraps through the fence when she was 10, sent it. The slide was a wire that lit up a map. Ashton had built a consulting company in his spare time, a small legal fiction with a good name, Atlas Advisory Partners, and had put himself in position to start collecting referral fees from vendors he pushed into our supply chain. It was unethical and, depending on the undisclosed nature of the relationships, illegal. It was also sloppy, which is the ruin of arrogant men. To make matters worse, I learned what he did to people who said no. A regional manager named Hector left a voicemail on Danielle's phone. His voice shook. He said that after he refused to sign a 5-year contract with the inventory software company, Ashton had leaned over the conference table and said, in a voice just above a whisper, "It would be a shame if the downsizing next quarter found you light on value." Hector had 3 children and a mortgage with an adjustable rate he had thought would adjust downward. Ashton had included, as a kindness, a reminder that the clause in the retention bonus allowed for clawbacks if the region missed growth targets. Danielle called me. "You were right," she said. "Do we have what we need?" "We do if we are brave." I have learned that bravery is what you call it after you have survived. Beforehand, it is just a series of shakes and doubts that sound like cutlery in a drawer. The next steps were boring and exact. We gathered documentation. We traced payments from the vendor to Atlas Advisory Partners. We found 2, each for a figure that would make a church treasurer cough. We found emails addressed to a private account, in which Ashton described his own employer's process for onboarding preferred vendors, step by step, like a safecracker explaining how to open the town bank. We found 2 notes that would have been sweet if they were not sour, where he told the vendor to take care of an underqualified sales friend he had promised a place. We captured all of it because people who believe they are unassailable write in a way that assumes eggs do not break when you drop them. There is a board for what he had just joined. They are the ones who make offers of titles with words like vice and president in them. They are the ones who pretend a vote is a surprise when it is not. I called a special session. I did not name the subject. I dressed the request in words that signal a fire without admitting it. "Attendance will be full," Danielle said. "But before that, you should know, Ashton is speaking at the quarterly town hall on Friday. He plans to announce a new, transparency initiative and a respect for service commitment with the regions. He asked us to create a badge they can print to hang in their offices. It is very heavy on exclamation points." "That," I said, "is perfect." I went home and told Lucy. She sat with her hands around a mug she had not sipped yet. "Will this hurt Margaret?" she asked. "It will hurt less than the future where he ruins us," I said. "And it will hurt less than the future where he thinks this is the way a man should be." She nodded. "You will protect the grandchildren." "Yes." "And you will protect Margaret." "I will do my best." She looked at me with the face of a woman who had waited out storms. "I know what your best looks like," she said. I did not sleep the night before the town hall. At dawn, I watched the light contain the trees. People call the waiting calm peaceful, but for me, it felt like standing in my boots while water crept over my toes. I thought about calling Margaret. I decided she would need me more after. The town hall was held in an auditorium with chairs that insist on a posture you would not choose. The employees filed in and the air filled with the quiet social noise of people in the same boat. Ashton came out with his new insecurity haircut, the kind that sends a message about seriousness by taking from the temples, and a suit that made his shoulders look like shrugged granite. He smiled and walked like a man who believed he would never have to step around puddles again. "Good morning," he said, and the room answered mechanically. "I am thrilled to announce our commitment to transparency, integrity, and the respect due to every teammate. We are only as strong as our values, and our values are our backbone. There is a special heat that flares behind your eyes when someone you know to be false presses your values like a stamp into his forehead." He went on. "Charts. Words. Initiatives." People nodded. Some looked at their phones. Hector sat in the fourth row with his hands clenched into a prayer he had forgotten to make. When Ashton said the phrase, "align our incentives," Danielle stood up. She introduced herself the way lawyers do when they are about to skin a truth. She said there were items for the company to address immediately in order to align our practices with our values. She said, "align," again because she is polite, and then she clicked to the next slide. It was the vendor's slide with the Atlas Advisory Partners logo. Ashton stared at it as if it were a stranger who had his face. Danielle clicked to the payments. She clicked to the emails. She clicked to the terms of employment, which he had signed with Flourish, and to the clause forbidding undisclosed conflicts of interest. She read it out loud, slowly, the way you read vows, or sentences. By then, the room had gone as quiet as a winter pond. You could feel the stilled water. Ashton said my name, softly. "Walter," he said, and then louder, "Walter." He smiled as if to call me to a joke. "You put her up to this." I stood because standing was kindness. I did not speak because speaking would have been the first stone. He did not know how to fight a man who refused to put his hands up. He turned to Danielle and said there had been a misunderstanding. He had meant the consulting company to remain dormant. It was a placeholder. He had never meant to accept money. Those were reimbursements, which is what men call bribes when the check is in their account. Hector stood. He is not tall. He is the kind of man who has carried crates and Loronas at midnight for neighbors who needed him and who never once announced it. He said in a voice that filled the room without trying, "You told me to sign or you would cut my hours in half." Ashton smiled and said that was a misremembering. He used words like clarify in context because there are men who believe that if they lay enough fancy cloth over a table, you will forget the wood underneath. Danielle finished. The board was convening at noon. Ashton would be on leave until then. Security would collect his badge, not as a punishment, but as a procedure. He laughed at the word procedure as if it were a minor dog nipping at his heel. Then he refused to hand over the badge. 2 security guards stood at the edge of the stage like bookends. The audience watched the fragile choreography of men avoiding humiliation. In the end, Ashton pulled the lanyard over his head as if removing a necklace. He looked at me and mouthed a word I will not repeat. I kept my hands in my pockets to avoid using them. Afterward, in the hallway, he came up to me with a face that looked like a man holding a piece of burning coal with the wrong fingers. He said, "You think you can do this to me? I have friends." "You do," I said. "They have been waiting for an excuse to abandon you." He stepped closer. "You are nobody," he said. "You are a pension and a recliner." I was tired of pretending lies were compliments. "Ashton," I said calmly, the paycheck you used to buy that suit was cut by a company Tallwater owns, funded by a line of credit Tallwater extended, approved by a board Tallwater can remove. You called me a parasite in front of my grandchildren. But every check you have ever cashed, for the last 10 years at least, has come from me. He stared at me as if I had said I had been wearing a costume all these years. It is a thing to watch the world. A man is standing on tilt. You are bluffing, he said, because when you do not know how to swim, every drop of water looks like a lie. Ask Danielle, I said. She stepped forward like an executioner sent by mercy. She confirmed what I had not wanted to say. Then she said the thing that matters most: we can be kind about this, or we can be loud. Ashton blinked. He chose loud. He called me names I had not heard since the mill, when men with hot tempers and hotter futures would spit their brittle hurt into the air. Security put their hands up in that gentle way that knows about dignity. He left the building to a sound I will not soon forget, silence that had decided to obey itself. At noon, the board met. The facts were facts. He was terminated. His options were reviewed according to a clause he had previously admired for its generosity. It permitted the company to reclaim his unvested equity. The Club Act clause he had used as a cudgel on Hector became the hand that reached toward him. Atlas Advisory Partners was referred to General Counsel. The vendor's agreement was paused. A compliance officer began calling other regions to ask them to send any emails from Ashton that felt like déjà vu. I went home. Lucy asked me how it went. I told her. She made tea the way my mother used to, with the bag steeped on the porch railing while the world continued. That night, Margaret came over without calling first. She had been crying and her hair had been gathered into an angry knot. She said, "What did you do?" I told her quietly, and I told her everything. I told her about Tallwater and why I had hidden it. I told her about the checks and why I had not wanted to say that line ever, not once. I told her about Hector and the vendor and the payments to Atlas Advisory Partners. I told her that men do not become this version of themselves overnight. I told her the first apology is usually a raindrop that announces a flood. She pressed her hands to her eyes and said his name like a prayer. Then she asked me the worst question you can ask a parent: did I choose wrong? You chose with the information you had, I said. We all do. She asked if I could undo it. I told her I could not, and that I would not even if I could. I am not punishing you, I said. I am protecting your children. I stopped short of the next sentence, because it is a blade. I am protecting you from your choices. She drank tea. She looked at Lucy in the kitchen, rinsing cups. She said, "Why did he call you a parasite?" "Because I did not brag," I said. "And because I let him talk like a boy in a room that was trying to be a church." She laughed in spite of herself and then cried harder. I held her. Fathers are trained to fix things. There are some things you hold instead. The next week was a field of knots. Ashton called. He left voicemails that alternated between rage and reason. He told me I had misinterpreted his advisory services, that he had intended to disclose them, that I had timed this to hurt him. He demanded to know whether the rumors of Tallwater were true. I did not pick up. There are conversations you enter only with a lawyer and a fire extinguisher. Margaret consulted an attorney recommended by someone who had chosen badly once and badly twice before choosing well. She learned more about what it means to be married to a man whose business is himself. She learned about assets and about liabilities, about how money can make a tunnel and then demand you live under it. I saw the grandchildren on Wednesday. We fed ducks. My granddaughter, Ellie, told me she had seen a big boy push a little boy at recess and that the teacher had moved the big boy's clip to yellow. Yellow is a warning, she said. If you get to red, you lose quiet time. What happens if you lose quiet time? I asked. She thought about it. You cry later. That Saturday, I drove to the mill. It is not mine anymore, but the old foreman, Pete, still meets me on the loading dock like a man who never learned how to retire. We sat on the dock on 5-gallon buckets like thrones and watched a truck back into Bay 2. He said, I heard about the town hall. News travels. He grunted. We put his name on the board where the safety numbers go. The polish squealed like a mouse when it touched. We watched the truckers sign their names in that slow, careful way some men have when they learn to write with pain. Pete said, You never made me feel small, Walter. I said, I never needed you to be small for me to be big. I had not meant to say it like that, but sometimes the truth spills. The next part had room for pettiness. I took none. Ashton needed to learn more than a lesson. He needed a life that would not let him speak to receptionists like servants or salespeople like obstacles. He needed to be paid less and to be valued more by people who knew the cost of what they did. I told the board I would like to propose an arrangement, a probationary role in a tall water subsidiary far from Margaret, far from the office with the water feature, far from the suits that make men into mannequins. I chose a place where the floors were scuffed by the honest work of wheels. A distribution center on the edge of town, where a manager named Rosa had kept a skeleton crew fed and housed through 2 winters by trading shifts like soup recipes. I called Rosa. I told her everything. I told her I needed a favor I only asked because I could ask no one else. If he will come, I said, would you make him right? Do you want him fired, humbled, or fixed? She asked. Fixed, I said. I paused. If he can be. Rosa laughed. We can try. But I will not let him hurt anyone here. The board agreed on a narrow path. Ashton could keep his benefits long enough to keep the children insured. He could earn an honest wage reorganizing inventory during a pilot program we called Visibility 2.0, because men like Ashton cannot resist the gravity of a buzzword. He would report to Rosa. He would do so for a year. He would attend weekly training sessions on compliance and leadership that involves listening. He would pay back the referral fees he had accepted from the vendor. If he left the program, if he refused any one of the conditions, the separation would be final and loud. The night I told Margaret, she said, he will not do it. I asked her what she wanted to happen. She covered her mouth. She did not want to say yet. I did not ask again. The next morning, the children played on the carpet while Lucy read them the book about the snail who carries his house on his back. Ashton did not call me to accept. He called Rosa. Rosa called me afterward. She said, he asked me what the base pay was. I told him. He made a sound like he was going to be sick. Then he asked me what the bonus structure was. I told him there was none. He said the word you are not supposed to say in front of your grandmother. Then he asked me who he would be managing. I told him, the work. He did not accept that day. He took 2. He called his brother, who told him that any job was better than being a headline. He called his friend, who told him that an advisory role could be created at a boutique firm in the city with a fancy conference room and no clients. He asked how long it might take. His friend said, long enough for you to burn your bridges and sell the rope. On the third day, he accepted. Rosa assigned him the lowest rung of difficulty that would hurt his pride enough to matter: zone realignment. It is like cleaning the attic of a stranger's house, with consequences. In the first week, he miscounted a bay and a half and had to apologize to a forklift driver named Miles, who has patience like a lake. In the second week, he tried to reorganize the color-coded tags into a system more intuitive to executives, and in doing so created a small chaos that rippled through the place like a dropped stack of plates. Rosa took him to the break room and told him her rules. Rule 1, she said, tapping the table with her finger. You are not here to be understood. You are here to understand. Rule 2, you are not managing a spreadsheet. You are managing 500 shoulder blades and the skulls that carry their headaches home. Rule 3, if you make a change, you do not get to leave early. You stay late and watch what it breaks. He called me one night after week 3. He did not say my name. He said, I have never been so tired. He did not ask for sympathy. He asked for nothing. He hung up. I stood there with the phone, feeling something loosen in my chest that could have been mercy. Margaret found a therapist who asked her to write down the words she wanted to say and burn them in a bowl that had belonged to my mother. She borrowed the bowl and cried after the first lighting as if she had burned a photograph. She told me that Ashton went to bed sour as a brine for the first week, then fell silent for the second, then in the third week asked the children what dinosaurs they liked. It was nothing. It was not nothing. Rosa called me after a month. He is not a natural, she said. But he has stopped trying to win the room in the first 5 minutes, which makes him better than half the men I have trained. She paused. He moved pallets with his own hands today. He did not announce it. In the second month, Ashton volunteered to cover a Saturday shift because Miles's wife had surgery. In the third, he stood between a driver and a guard when a misunderstanding turned loud. He told Rosa he had wanted to help and then waited for the lecture, and when it came, do not escalate unless asked, he absorbed it and did not tell her how men like him learn fast. He did not become a saint. He still liked the mirror. He still checked it with his eyes when he saw himself reflected in a freezer door. But he started bringing coffee to the men who worked the cold lane because the first day he had done it he had spilled his own and had shaken with the part of the cold that lives in you for an hour after. He started saying thank you to the janitor. He stopped speaking to receptionists in tones that chipped enamel. Hector transferred into Rosa's building after miles of paperwork. He requested it silently and then spoke to me when he saw me in the hallway between cages of tape. He said, I do not know if I can forgive him. I said, then do not. He nodded. But I can work near him, he added, as if that were something to be proud of. It was. The vendor who had paid Atlas Advisory Partners changed their slide. They paid a penalty that I directed into a scholarship fund in the names of 3 line workers who had died during the pandemic of boredom and bad luck. The fund sent their children to community college with books paid for and a winter coat that felt like a hug. One afternoon, late in the year, Rosa called me to come by the distribution center. She did not say why. When I arrived, the staff had gathered by the loading dock. There is a custom in places like that one. When a person has gone a year without an injury or a violation, they ring a bell. It is not the bell that matters. It is the hands that clap afterward. Ashton stood by the bell, his palms raw from a day of moving what he used to call units and now called boxes. He looked dinged up in the way that makes a man's face honest. Rosa nodded to him, and he rang it. The sound was small, silly even, but the applause was not. It rolled across him like absolution. He saw me at the edge of the group and stepped over. He did not say thank you. I did not say you are welcome. He said, we reorganized zones B through D. I said, I heard. He said, Miles told me he will not forgive me. I said, I know. He nodded. I figured that is better than pretending he does. He looked down at his hands. They were not soft. We stood there while the bell cooled. He said, about that day in my kitchen. He swallowed. I was unkind. He looked at me and, for the first time, did not look through me. I was cruel, he corrected himself. I am sorry. I did not absolve him. That is not how this works. I simply told him we were going to be at Ellie's dance recital on Friday and if he wanted to come, he should wear something that would let him sit on bleachers for 2 hours without complaining. He laughed a small, surprised laugh that sounded like someone discovering $1 in a winter coat. At the recital, Ellie was as serious as a surgeon. She looked for me in the crowd the way deer look at a stream before drinking. She found me. She smiled without breaking character. Afterward, Ashton bent down to tie the ribbon of her shoe, badly, and she forgave him with a gravity that made me look away. People ask me, when they do not know me, what it felt like to reveal the truth about those checks. It felt like opening a window in a room you had painted shut. It felt like air where there had been none. It felt like risking a draft. It did not make me noble. It made me honest. I had been patient. Patience is not a virtue when it becomes cooperation. There are men who dream of revenge the way other men dream of lakes. I am not one of them. My dreams are full of mills and machines and a river that turned a turbine that kept men fed. My revenge, if that is what we must call it, was a narrow path that led a man back to his feet without providing him a podium. It was a refusal to let my grandchildren learn the wrong lessons from a man who loved his own echo. Last week, I went to lunch at the diner where the waitress still calls me hon in a voice that can make a widow feel married again. Ashton arrived late, breathless, with half a pallet of apology in his eyes. He ordered soup and drank it like a man who had just come out of the cold. He told me a joke that was not cruel. It was not very funny either, which felt like progress. When the bill came, he reached for it and then stopped, a look in his eye like a man who has seen a snake and is not sure whether it is real. He smiled and slid the bill toward me, then shook his head and pulled it back. Let me, he said. I would like to work my way toward paying for more than soup. I let him. Some debts matter. Some do not. The bill was $10. The interest he owes my daughter is the only number that matters, and that ledger is written in a language time alone can translate. Do I forgive him? The truth is not a single word. Forgiveness is a habit in the present tense. It is the sound of a bell rung by a man with calluses on his hands. It is the look a granddaughter gives her grandfather when he shows up for the small recitals and the big ones. It is a man who once spoke to women in lobbies as if they were machines now learning the names of the men and women who mopped the break room floor. At dinner last Sunday, Ashton stood, carefully now, like a man who is not sure his authority and his voice are the same, and brought his glass up half a foot. To Dad, he said. Who taught me something this year I should have learned a long time ago. Which is? I asked. He paused. He looked at me with a humility I did not expect to arrive and which I will always be suspicious of now, the way a man checks the pressure of his tires after the first blowout. He said, that you should never believe the source of your checks is proof of your worth. Only the value you create when nobody's watching can do that. He did not wait for applause. He drank. He took the garbage out afterward without being asked. The bag ripped and he said a word that made Lucy cough and then apologize for coughing. He gathered the mess. He cleaned it without needing an audience. I stood at the sink and washed my hands until the water ran cold. The maple leaves did their trick. The grandchildren ran through the yard wearing nothing but sunlight and time. Lucy touched my back in that place between the scar and the good skin and said, "You can put the folder away now." I smiled. "For a while," I said. I did not add, "but not forever." I have learned that secrets, like tools, belong on a shelf within reach. I have learned that men, like machines, can be repaired if you care enough and if you decide you will accept the loss of the day as the price of the week. When I sat down to write this, I thought I would end with a flourish, something neat and sharp. Instead, I will end here, in a room with a table that has seen elbows and tears, with a woman who waited out storms, with a daughter whose hands no longer shake when she picks up her keys, with a man who may yet become better than I imagined, and with grandchildren who believe that grown-ups can apologize and mean it. And when I look at Ashton now and think of that day with his glass in the air, I feel no sweetness in the secret I carried. I feel something nearer to duty. I did what I did because he asked the world to admire him for holding a thing he had not built. He did not know who had paid for the hammer. He knows now. The rest is up to him.
Hello everyone, and thank you for watching. I truly hope you enjoyed listening to this story as much as I enjoyed creating it. If you did, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel to help support the creation of more stories like this. Have a great day or evening.